Hello and welcome to another edition of the Americano show. We're going to be talking about something that happened on Sunday the 15th of September, and that was another assassination attempt on Donald J. Trump. The second assassination attempt on Donald Trump in just over 2 months. It was not as dramatic as the attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. The shooter was accosted and shot at, it seems, by Secret Service. And has since been apprehended, we believe. He's thought to be called Ryan Roth, although that is still not confirmed at the time of recording. To talk about this, I'm delighted to be joined here and in the Spectator's office by Kate Andrews.
That's me.
The economics editor of the Spectator. And Kate, I'm going to start with the boring partisan point that was made a lot after the Butler, Pennsylvania shooting, which is that Donald Trump is often blamed for the January 6th Capitol Hill riots, for his inflammatory rhetoric, for his incendiary rhetoric that caused it. A lot of Republicans say the way Democrats talk about Donald Trump is the reason people keep trying to kill him. They have a point, don't they?
I don't think it's a boring point. I think it's an important point, because if you are, quite rightly, in my opinion, going to be a critic of what Donald Trump did on January 6th, the way that he encouraged that crowd to go to the Capitol, the way he talked about his own vice president and put him in danger. If you're going to be critical of that, you have to be critical of the language that is then used against the former president. And that has become increasingly hyped up. It has become increasingly intense. And to talk about Donald Trump as a dictator, as somebody whose hands America would not be safe in, as somebody who simply, could not be trusted were he to even win a Democratic election, means that you are going to be encouraging this kind of inflammatory rhetoric amongst those who would do something really stupid and really crazy. Now, is it their fault? I think that is a bit more of a stretch. I mean, if this suspect, and he is currently a suspect, Ryan Roth, decided to pick up a weapon and go try to shoot the former president, that is ultimately on him. I would not say that is ultimately on Joe Biden, for example. But should people be far more aware of what they're doing? I mean, Trump acts innocent on January 6th. We saw this in the debate. He doesn't want to take any responsibility for his language. As recently as last week, he's still saying, I had nothing to do with that. But other people should be more responsible for their language as well. This is such a heated campaign. As you say, 2 assassination attempts in such a short period of time. We're not at election day yet. Goodness forbid what happens after election day, and it's going to take days for results to come in. And this is so tense. Everyone needs to be de-escalating. No one seems to want to take responsibility for changing their narrative.
Well, the reason I said it was a boring point, it's probably boring was the wrong word. I think
never boring, Fred.
Silly, because really you can't do anything about the fact that political rhetoric is going to get heated. And because political rhetoric is very heated at the moment, mentally ill people are going to respond to it in very strange ways. From what we know about this alleged shooter, he seems to have been all over the place politically. He seems to have been a Trump supporter at some stages. He's very motivated by Ukraine. He seems to have volunteered in Ukraine. He has tried to sort of lead international brigades against Ukraine. In interviews he comes across that he's given, he seems to come across pretty unhinged. There's in a country of 320 million people, there are going to be people who are mentally ill who react to politics in a violent way.
No, I know what you mean, Fred, and I think that's somewhat the point I was trying to make, that just because a politician says something doesn't mean that their words can be held responsible for the actions of a crazy person. And in America, politics is heated. That's, part of the game. However, you and I are old enough to remember, and I love your thoughts on this Obama speech, when politicians were deliberately trying to de-escalate. There was that speech in 2016 that Obama gave in support of Hillary Clinton. I think it was 2016. And there was a heckler. There was an older guy. And the crowd started to boo him. And that was when Obama famously said, "Don't boo, vote." And he also pointed out this man was probably a veteran. And he pointed out all these things to kind of calm the crowd down and actually say, no, don't go in that direction, go in this direction. Now, some people will say, that was Obama performing and all the rest of it, that benefits him. But I would argue it benefits the nation too. There was a time where we did try to de-escalate this stuff. That was probably a good thing.
It definitely helps to try and de-escalate.
Right.
I'd agree with that. I do think we might be living in such a sort of over-therapized culture when, we talk about how much people are suffering, people are hurting, and how divisiveness is making people violent and so on. And that almost, in some instances, seems to encourage people to be more violent and more unstable. But that's a difficult point to argue, so let's not do that. I would like to talk about the impact or not this might have on the election. A lot of people have been saying how extraordinary it is that only 9 weeks ago Donald Trump was shot through the ear. And it seems to have been, to use the Republican word, memory hold, or certainly doesn't seem to have had the impact on the election that a lot of people thought it would, largely because Joe Biden pulled out of the race and was replaced by Kamala Harris and so on. This is a more minor event, but in any other news cycle, in any other year, this would be a huge event.
It's just crazy to think that a second assassination attempt is somehow like second news story. In some ways, it's really odd. And you're completely right. You wrote this morning on Coffee House that those words, fight, 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 back in July when he stood up after the first assassination attempt, felt like they were going to change the whole course of the election. But so much has happened since. It does feel like it's faded away. I think the fact that this has happened closer to election day is going to remind a lot of people about what's already happened. And I think for Donald Trump, in terms of crude polling figures, that could be helpful. But I mean, the trade-off here is so incredibly dangerous. The fact that we're having to deal with assassination attempts to see which ways the polls are going. And actually, after that first assassination attempt, Trump had that big bump, calmed down. Kamala Harris hasn't really seen that big bump post-debate. I think there's an outstanding question to your point, like, this is just crazy stuff, and yet nothing seems to be swinging it one way or the other. They're still absolutely neck and neck. But I do agree with you that I think this will be a reminder about what's already happened and frankly, the brave way that Trump handled certainly that first assassination attempt. But I mean, do you think at this point anything is going to sway these polls one way or another? It's just... they're so tight.
It doesn't seem like it, and it certainly seems like the debate, I mean, it's too early to tell probably convincingly on the polling, but it seems like the debate, which everybody, vast majority of people seem to agree, went well for Kamala Harris and badly for Donald Trump. Doesn't seem like that's made any impact on the polls. So it'll be difficult to say whether this seems to make any impact on the polls. I do think when you look at the responses within Trump world, going back to the shooting in Pennsylvania, it's already fairly commonplace now to suggest that it was some sort of deep state attempt to take out Donald Trump. Already we're seeing with this attempted shooting yesterday that this is some sort of operation carried out. Because he was involved in Ukraine, he may have been a CIA asset. If he was a CIA asset, I think, to quote Donald Trump, they're not sending their best.
Indeed, they're not doing a very good job.
They're not doing a very good job. So, but I do wonder whether, rather than kind of getting public sympathy or sympathy of people who might go one way or the other in this election, the people in Trump world, when they start saying that this guy, what they say a lot is they've tried to kill him twice. Who's this they?
Yeah.
And you never know. And when they start talking like that, they do sound mad. And again, it puts people off Trump world. So there's lots of things going on.
Yeah, I mean, I felt after the debate, it was quite clear that Donald Trump was his own worst enemy on that stage, that he took things to the extreme. He took Kamala Harris's bait, and had he just rode it back and stayed a bit calm, it would have been a much better performance for him. And I think that this is kind of true throughout Trump world and throughout this campaign, as you say, whether it's the debate or something so crazy as an assassination attempt. When you go to the fringes and the extreme, you're just naturally going to lose a lot more support. It is increasingly clear that Donald Trump is not only a huge target, but he keeps going out, he keeps doing these rallies, he keeps living his life in a way that if you were more moderate about this in your language, you could come across as quite reasonable and perhaps be winning people over to the fact that you're being brave, you're still going out there, you're still doing your message. When you go to these extremes of it's the CIA or they're trying to get him, he might win the election in a couple months' time. He might even win the popular vote in a couple months' time. It is possible. The polls at the moment suggest that there is clearly still a pathway for Donald Trump to win this election. It's so up in the air. Why are you already creating the narrative that, like, he can't win, he won't win, he can't survive, he won't be allowed to survive? It's not actually what America is reflecting about Donald Trump at the moment. So yeah, when they do that, they clearly lose a lot of support. And oftentimes the simplest answer is the right one. There's been a lot of sloppiness around protecting the former president, and it should make us nervous about who else they're sloppy in protecting, but that's a lot more likely than this conspiracy.
Well, I was about to do a complete 180 on my conspiracy talk.
Fantastic, Fred, take us there.
The sloppiness is odd.
Is it?
Well, I mean, so an official said yesterday in a press conference afterwards, I think he was a Secret Service official, said that had he been a sitting president, the whole golf course would have been secured. And you think, given the recency of the last assassination attempt on Trump, it probably should have been entirely secured. So the fact that another shooter was able to get within 400, 500 yards of Donald Trump, I wouldn't say it's suspicious, but the sloppiness is very strange.
And embarrassing.
Embarrassing. And almost it speaks to a lack of kind of professionalism in the Secret Service, even though in this case the Secret Service did its job.
Yeah.
And appeared to have stopped Donald Trump being killed or shot at.
Yeah. And I mean, I think they're going to be very big outstanding questions about how on earth this guy with something that looks like an AK was able to get that close to the president again, the former president. And I think that those are the right kinds of questions to be asking. Moving it into this territory of conspiracy never really helps anybody. But it often feels to me that Team Trump just can't help themselves. And I what do you think about this? Like, the fact that there's so many opportunities for them to have a win. There's so many opportunities for them to land a blow against the opposition. There's so many opportunities to take something horrible that we should describe it as horrible that this keeps happening to the former president. Nobody can possibly support this. And then they morph it in this way that is not politically helpful to them.
Well, let's move on from shootings to make a change and talk about the sort of state of the race since the debate. As I said, the polls don't seem to have shifted much in Kamala Harris's favour since her momentum does seem to have slowed down. The cat memes have been the biggest story of the week up until this shooting attempt.
Yeah, a lot of memes.
Do you think Donald Trump is enjoying new momentum, or is it a case that just nobody has any momentum at the moment?
Sorry to interrupt, but if you're enjoying the show, why not subscribe to The Spectator? In September, you can get 3 months of website and app access absolutely free. Follow the Tory leadership campaign, Labour's inaugural budget and the US elections with Britain's best informed journalists. And get your first 3 months free, only in September. Go to www.spectator.co.uk/TV offer.
I think that the momentum behind Kamala Harris was always bound to slow, not least because you had this huge rush of, Democrat heavyweights, celebrities, all the rest of it weighing in, saying, she is the future, this is the way we're going to go. But once that faded away, you needed something else to prop it up. Where was the public policy? Where was the actual oomph, the excitement behind this campaign, the ideas, the future, and the vision for America? Now, Harris got away with not having to say any of that during the debate because Donald Trump never pushed her on it. But I do think those questions are still outstanding for lots of Americans. And given the fact that not much is being filled in those gaps, how do you maintain that momentum? I think with Donald Trump, at this point, people really do know what they're getting. And I think for me, the question has always been not who's going to win more people over to their cause, where are Americans going to land when they just think, okay, I don't really like either of them, but here's the one I truly can't vote for. And I think maybe momentum slowed because people are still weighing up that decision. Can I really not vote for Kamala Harris and her progressive policies, or can I really not vote for Donald Trump and everything that we now know he represents?
You're speaking about yourself there, aren't you?
Is this a little personal
You're
for
go-
me?
I'm
Is
going-
this a
I'm
little
gonna go on the
personal for me?
person.
Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Look, I can't even begin to deny how truly distraught I am about the options on the table. But like, how can you get momentum behind either of those positions? But it does feel like something slowed, hasn't it? And also because we have no guarantee of another debate between Harris and Donald Trump, maybe the most exciting moment has almost come to pass.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like... Well, there's the vice presidential debate,
Yeah.
which I think will be very interesting. But
Maybe we'll get some policy there.
a policy there, or more attempted assassinations, just so
Jeez.
that the divine scriptwriters can kind of keep people guessing. On Kamala Harris, you are not a fan of her politics, and I think even though you're a very fair-minded person, you don't seem to be you don't seem to be much of a fan of her as a human being.
Ooh, I try not to get into any of that. You can never know somebody's heart and soul, really.
I'm willing to go there.
Okay.
And say she's awful.
I struggle with any politician who has made their career out of, in my opinion, such an unfair and harsh stance towards far more vulnerable people. If we just look at her record in California, as DA, as Attorney General, going after the parents of truant kids, going after nonviolent drug offenders to up your numbers in prison, going after some of the most vulnerable people to make a statement about yourself and to propel you higher up into politics. I mean, every one of my libertarian instincts just completely pushes back on that. It's not as if in the past I've had the nicest things to say about Donald Trump either. But we're in a very weird situation where, Kamala Harris completely separated herself from her California record in order to excel in progressive politics in D.C. Now we're back to talking about law and order. I mean, her and her campaign have decided to put that back on the ballot. The idea that she's going to be like she was, the prosecutor in California. I mean, they're almost asking us to go back to that record now, and I find the whole thing quite horrifying. I can't help but just continue to feel very frustrated with Donald Trump because regardless of what you think of him, it is his job, it is both of their jobs in this campaign to scrutinize the other. And she is doing that job of him. I think she was quite successful in the debate, and that's why a lot of people thought she won. He is not doing that job of her. And I think that the American people deserve to see that. They deserve to have these records completely laid bare so that people can make their choice. And I suppose maybe one of my frustrations with Kamala Harris is actually the fact that I just don't think that scrutiny is totally existent, especially on the Republican side. There's lots of criticism of the media. Where's the criticism of the actual candidate and the actual party that's supposed to be poking holes in her record, in her public policy? They're not doing a great job.
There are lots of sort of never Trumpy Republicans who are now fully in the tank for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking to me how you could... I don't want to directly compare these two candidates because I think that's kind of an impossible task. But if one of your frustrations with Donald Trump, as is mine, is the way that he punches down, is the way that from 2016, 2015 onwards, ever since he really started this true campaign to become president and then indeed succeeded, it was the fact that he was always punching down towards people of different backgrounds, women, across the board, the nasty, awful comments punching down. I feel like Harris's record, in a different way, punches down a lot too. And I can't ignore that. And I've never really understood how a never-Trumper could fully ignore that either.
I said there's lots of never-Trumpers who are supporting Kamala Harris. I don't think there really are. I think there's just lots in the media because they tend to be given a lot of prominence.
Well, and I think that social media and I think X and all of these platforms, really highlight all of this. But if you look at what your average American actually thinks of these two candidates, no one's enthusiastic. No one's thrilled.
But that brings me on to what I wanted to ask you about last of all, which is that this New York Times Siena poll, which horrified some of the Harris campaign, not last weekend, the weekend before, because it showed that as far as Americans are concerned, Trump seems to be the more moderate candidate in the sense that only a third of people thought he was too far to the right, and about half of people thought that Kamala Harris was too far to the left. Now, for Brits, if you try to explain that to Brits, they think that's insane because all they've ever heard is that Donald Trump is crypto-fascist and so on. Could you explain why Americans think that? Because it seems to me they look at this through a lens that a lot of foreigners don't really understand.
Yeah, I think there are different lenses to look at it through, and the immediate one that I would probably pick is the economy here. America is much further to the right on the economy, and in terms of just kind of keep the state out of it a bit more, leave people alone a bit more, than you're ever going to get in Europe. And so, and then you can't separate that from the fact that for the past 3.5 years, almost 4 years, I mean, really ever since Biden came into power, the economy has been one of the top issues. And Americans have been saying for years now, especially with inflation, that it is one of their biggest concerns. And you have Kamala Harris, who is directly tied into Bidenomics. I mean, this is her administration that's done it. People are going to be thinking with that economy cap on, as they do in every election. But I think in this one, given the inflation crisis, it's an even bigger issue than it normally is. And they look at her voting record. They look at what she supported. In 2019, she was ranked the most left-wing Democratic senator. She has held positions that in America are considered to be very, very progressive. Overhauling the economy for a $10 trillion Green New Deal, overhauling healthcare. Look, the American healthcare system is abysmal, but she wants to move it to an NHS-style system, a la Bernie Sanders Medicare for all. I mean, if the system's not working in a country of 70 million people, it's probably not going to translate very well to a country of over 300 million people. These are the kinds of positions that really freak Americans out. And I suspect they think that she's more radical in some regards, particularly because they're looking at the economy. They're thinking it's been a bad couple of years for them, actually. And then they see that in the past, she's not only supported what's happened the past couple of years, she's been doubling down on much more radical policy. Donald Trump, for all of his talk of tariffs, for all of his talk of trade wars back in 2016, there was some of that, and we should be critical of that. He actually operated a pretty traditional Republican agenda in a lot of ways when it came to tax cuts, when it came to business regulation and trying to work with business and all the rest of it. And people responded very well. People still talk about that Trump economy. It still polls very, very well. I don't know if it's going to be the same. He's really taking his vice presidential candidate's line about tariffs and doubling down on that stuff. If he goes that way, Americans are in for a nightmare time with the economy. But from what they remember and what they've experienced under Trump and Biden and Harris, you can see how one might come to the conclusion that her economic ideas are much more radical in a direction Americans on average don't really want, and why that would be at the top of their list right now as in terms of priorities.
Kate Andrews, thank you very much as ever for coming on to Americano. I hope the next time we speak it will not be after an assassination attempt.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Very good.